Ever had someone call the cops on you for living on your own land? Picture an HOA president waving forged papers, two men in fake uniforms, and a quiet driveway that suddenly feels like the front line. That's where this story starts, and it gets much worse before it gets better. Let me start from beginning. When I moved out here, it was for one simple thing: peace. Wide sky, a small house, a gate I hammered together with my own hands. No rules about mailbox colors, no committees deciding what kind of wind chimes are acceptable. The deed is clear. The county records are clear. My property line ends at that cedar post. Simple, legal final. I'd spent years in noisy places, and this quiet was a promise to myself. I didn't expect the quiet to come with a queen. Her name was Karen, and she arrived like a declaration. Clipboard, perfect hair, a bumper sticker that somehow made her feel like royalty. The first time she rolled through my gate, it felt like a trespass. The third time, it felt like a challenge. She'd slow smile that thin smile and then gun it through the driveway like she owned the road. The gate would splinter, the hinges would scream, and I'd be rebuilding while neighbors muttered that she'd always been a character. Character is one way to put it. Tyrant is another. She started small, a passive-aggressive note affixed to my mailbox, a red ink violation left under the wiper of my truck. Then the letters got fancier, printed on HOA letterhead, stamped with dates and fees. The amount of confidence she displayed in the handwriting bothered me more than the fines. I checked county records twice. There was no HOA jurisdiction here. I bought the property clean, outside their boundaries. I said it calmly when I bumped into her in the gravel. "Not in your HOA." She fired back like it was a personal insult. The moment a petty person mistakes paper for power, things change. Neighbors started to look away less and nod more. A few told me under their breath that Karen had done this before. Fines that weren't real. Inspections that felt more like show trials. People paid to stop the noise because standing up costs more than keeping your lawn trimmed. That's the poison of this sort of control. It isn't loud. It's slow. It's the steady drip that softens resistance until people stop fighting for themselves. I documented everything. Cameras went up on the porch. A simple hard drive in the center of the house. Motion sensors at the gate. I didn't do it because I wanted a war. I did it because you learn fast that evidence matters when someone with confidence and a clipboard says you're wrong. The pattern was predictable. She escalated when she thought no one was looking. That's when you have to be ready to show what's true. Then the evening the lights rolled in, the plan she'd been building all along finally played out. Headlights carved through dusk. Two men in dark uniforms stepped out of a black SUV, and Karen stood at the corner like she'd called an audience. "Trespasser," she told anyone within hearing distance. Neighbors leaned on fences, phones already in hand. I felt the old familiar knot, the one you get when bureaucracy meets bravado. The men approached like they belonged. Their badges glinted in the porch light, and everything in me said the badges were wrong. I kept my hands visible. I pulled out the deed, the original paper signed and stamped years ago. I held it flat for anyone to read. The men exchanged looks that didn't match professional training. One had a gap-toothed badge that slid in its holder. The other's uniform had no department patch I recognized. Small things you only notice when you're not trying to fight, but to observe. Karen smiled like she'd already won. She had the audience, the narrative, the fake authority. All she needed was to push my patience, and she was counting on me to explode. But I didn't explode. I reached into my pocket and felt the leather of something I'd hoped I wouldn't need. It's a strange thing, carrying credentials and experience you never want to brandish on a front porch. It's less about intimidation and more about proof. I didn't pull a gun or shout. I pulled facts. I'd built a life on concrete work and careful records. My papers are not pretty, but they are binding. I set the deed down and started to record the scene with the porch camera like I'd done every time she stepped over a boundary. The men saw the small red LED blink, and the way their eyes flicked gave them away. They weren't cops. They were friends, relatives, and a hired stunt dressed for intimidation. The first badge slip felt like the first crack in a dam. Karen's grin faltered. You could almost watch the story she'd rehearsed dissolve. She reached, panicked, for a louder lie, a 911 call, a scream, a demand. That's when the real sirens showed up, not a minute after my call to the sheriff. Real cars, real uniformed officers with the county seal on their doors. The contrast was immediate. The fake crew froze, the fake badges got examined, and the air shifted. Something about seeing the truth in daylight makes the bravado look ridiculous. She tried to spin it, to say the men were HOA enforcement, to claim jurisdiction she didn't have. But when the sheriff lifted a laminated badge and asked for IDs, the charade collapsed. One of the men mumbled about being volunteers. Volunteers who carry fake badges and threaten property owners are not volunteers, they're criminals. The sheriff's quiet words, "Impersonating law enforcement is a serious offense," landed harder than any argument Karen had. Neighbors who'd been scared into silence found their tongues. One by one, they stepped forward with stories that matched the pattern my cameras had collected. Taped notices, threats, fines, and a record of repeated humiliation. The small private tyrant had built an empire out of fear, and she had just given everyone the proof they needed to take it apart. By the time they led the faux officers away, the night felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because the confrontation had been ugly and close. Lighter because the line I'd kept tidy, my property, my rights, had held. Karen's last look as deputies closed her car door was a raw mix of disbelief and fury. She shouted promises about lawyers and revenge, threats that sounded thin in the absence of her audience. The porch camera kept blinking red, logging every claim and counterclaim, every lie and every small truth. I walked back to my house with my keys cold in my palm. The gate was still splintered from the morning's stunt, and I knew repairs would be a weekend job. The longer view, though, was different. I had expected a fight that night. What I hadn't expected was how the neighborhood's quiet would start to change, not with yelling, but with people remembering how to stand up. The cameras would keep recording, and the next move wouldn't be mine alone. What Karen didn't realize was this: once you break someone's script, once you expose the act, you don't get to put the mask back on. And she was about to find out that performances have a way of collapsing when the audience decides it's seen enough. What Karen didn't realize is I wasn't just some stubborn neighbor. I had authority, paperwork, and patience. The next morning I would use all three, and the small kingdom she'd built on fake rules would start to unravel faster than she could imagine. The hard thing about catching someone in the act is that the moment you do, everything becomes louder. Word moves fast in small places, especially when the word is fraud. By dawn, my porch camera's uploads had reached the sheriff, and by mid-morning an investigator drove up with a look that meant this wasn't going to be handled like a routine neighbor dispute. They wanted the raw footage, the printed notices, the receipts. They wanted the chain of how a person who'd smiled over fences turned into someone handing out phony fines and recruiting friends to play law. I handed everything over without fanfare. There is a calm that comes from having proof. It does more work than an angry speech ever could. The HOA meeting that had once been Karen's stage turned into a different kind of theater. People who used to arrive with expensive wine now sat with folded arms and cold faces. The room filled not with polite chatter, but with the steady murmurs of people who'd been lied to. The investigators sat in the back and opened a folder. They read names, dates, and receipts, patterns of forged documents sent to multiple addresses, cash exchanged for compliance, and recorded threats. One by one, neighbors stood and spoke. Small confessions at first. She fined me for a mailbox color I never chose. Then bigger ones. She threatened foreclosure for late fees that never existed. She hired men to tow cars off driveways. The weight of admission made the air heavy. No one who'd been cowed for years wanted to be the first to admit how afraid they'd been. But seeing others do it made it easier. Karen tried to perform innocence. She read from a prepared page about community standards and civic duty. The researchers clicked through photos on a tablet, and cameras showed a different truth. Karen unlocking my cabin, greeting guests, plastering orange violation signs on doors she had no authority over. The screenshots froze her smile mid-sneer. It's one thing to have a theory about someone's motives. It's another to have a moment-by-moment record of them acting on those motives. The investigators were precise. This wasn't neighborhood gossip anymore. It was a paper trail long enough to make a courthouse listen. Then I placed the last document on the table. the one no one expected. Years back, when the developer folded, some lots moved through a management company to cover debts. I'd bought mine clean, but a paper trail showed the management company still held title to a parcel that included Karen's house until final transfer was processed. I didn't flaunt it. I simply laid it out. The room inhaled. The irony landed like a hammer. She'd been collecting fees and commanding authority on a property she technically wasn't clear of. Reports suggest she'd been paying what she thought was a mortgage to a firm tied to several HOA accounts. The investigators leaned in. They asked for bank transfers and copies. The names connected. The shell company linked back to vendors who'd done improvements her way again and again. The web was bigger than a single woman and a clipboard. It traced to friends, family loans, and a weak oversight board that preferred the comfort of her certainty to the mess of scrutiny. Within days, the county filed charges: fraud, impersonation, conspiracy. The fake officers were cited for impersonating peace officers and aiding in harassment. The HOA board, the ones who'd nodded at her dictums, were called to account. Some tried to claim ignorance. Others had receipts in their mailboxes and signatures on deposit slips that contradicted their statements. The legal machinery moved with a determined, steady pace. Arrest warrants, subpoenas, formal statements. The community watched as paper once used to bully them became the mechanism of their relief. Neighbors changed after that. Houses that had kept curtains closed now had front porches with people sitting and talking. Kids left their bikes leaning on lawns without worried glances. People offered each other help with fence repairs and garden plans. A few neighbors who'd paid hush money for years came forward to reclaim what had been taken from them, and the relief was almost visible, shoulders dropping, laughter returning like a tide. The HOA's little empire crumbled not with one dramatic fall, but with 1,000 small acts of truth. Testimony, uploaded videos, bank statements, official filings. As for Karen, there was no cinematic showdown. The woman who'd barked orders into the night was quiet in court. Her defense boiled down to, "I was protecting the community," which sounds hollow against a stack of forged notices and recorded conversations. Reports claimed she warned of lawsuits and revenge, but the county's interest didn't waver. Losing power has a way of narrowing one's options, and eventually those options shrink to legal counsel and bitter letters. She was removed from the board, her name scrubbed from the HOA email list, and, perhaps worst of all for someone built on image, people stopped answering when she called. I watched the aftermath with the odd sensation of being both spectator and participant. I hadn't wanted revenge. I just wanted to be left alone. But standing up had ripple effects I hadn't expected. It freed people who'd been paying for the comfort of quiet by giving up their dignity. It showed kids an ordinary truth. Power doesn't belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to whoever can back their claims with proof and persistence. The final line I said, months later when things settled, was small and true. In the end, all it took was one overlooked boundary line to bring her empire crashing down. It wasn't a gloat. It was a close, a reminder that laws and deeds can be dry paper until someone uses them to protect what's theirs. The neighborhood slowly stitched itself back together. People mowed lawns because they wanted to, not because a typed notice told them to. The gate I rebuilt after the first week stood stronger, and when someone asked if I'd ever wanted to escalate things further, I answered honestly, no. I wanted my quiet back. I got it, and the lesson left behind felt bigger than any one victory. It was a lesson about attention and courage, about how a single person's small acts of standing up can crack a system built on other people's silence.